Hello War of the Visions fans, I'm Jackie Fox, and in today's episode I want to talk a bit about power creep in War of the Visions because I have heard a lot said about this, and I think it's a nuanced topic, especially in this game. I think it's a nuanced topic in general, and in this video I would like to first kind of explain what power creep is, what it is especially in relation to War of the Visions, some sort of not necessarily solutions to power creep, but workarounds that War of the Visions in particular has been good at historically, but also how those workarounds are breaking down in the current meta and how future workarounds could fix this. See, here's power creep. It's like randomness. It's a necessary evil in video games, especially of this type. And the reason that it's a necessary evil is that things would get particularly stagnant if everything was the same power. It's also for the reason that they want you to keep spending to get those new units, but it is also, in effect, creating a dynamic and sometimes unpredictable format of play for all of us, and that is very interesting. But I think maybe even a bigger part than what I just said is that monetary angle. Gotchas are somehow very, very effective at making money in the video game industry. This means that they can soak up funding and build, hopefully, better games with better teams. Unfortunately, this is kind of breaking down throughout other parts of the video game industry, and especially when you're talking about like AAA games, it's getting its worst because you have that like necessity to spend a lot of money to make this huge AAA title, make it beautiful, make it play perfectly. But there's also a shrinking audience for those who is essentially paying less and less for them as well. So this is kind of how this art form stabilizes and is able to grow into the future in a way. And you may not like that, but the gacha system itself isn't necessarily tied to power creep. It's just that power creep can be used to drive sales. Now, the reason that I'm a War of the Visions player is that one thing that Gumi actually seems to do pretty well is having a regular schedule for updates for older characters. There are kind of two sorts of power creep. One that's small and a bit nebulous and harder to calculate, and there's one that's a lot more direct and obvious. At least here in War of the Visions. So about every year, a new system or level of power is released. At first, typically only the newest units have it and a few old favorites. Typically these are like the oldest units in the game, like Prince Mont always gets his upgrade first, and some other characters like that. So they're usually characters that aren't really seeing play that are all of a sudden viable again because everyone is held back from reaching their level of power. We see this time and time again, but we also see that upgrades to bring older characters to something comparable to that level of power become possible. Now, this doesn't mean that units from a generation or two ago are suddenly going to be meta again. And they're certainly not going to be the star or the character that you build your team around, at least in higher level competitive play. But these upgrades do often make them interesting to play with, and sometimes they give them something particularly powerful just because they feel like they have a long way to go to be relevant, and sometimes that inadvertent power level increase can make a unit super powerful again. Really good example of this about a year ago, maybe to 2 years ago, sometime in that period, was Skahal. Skahal got I think it was his master ability 2, gave him threshold courage. So as long as his HP was above 70%, he would not die. And this is also something that couldn't be dispelled by newer and popular units that spell that kind of thing, like the original Sephiroth. And this made him super meta, even though he was a year one unit that I think came out just before I actually started playing this game. So, very old unit. Suddenly, he's in top tier tournament competitive PvP. He's one of the best units in the game. This doesn't happen a lot, and he's not the best unit in the game anymore. Threshold courage isn't what it used to be. But if you play your cards right, every year or so, a lot of older units that by a lot of accounts don't really have a place in the meta currently will get a bump up that could make them relevant again. The second type of power creep is a lot less often dealt with. We have seen updates that have helped with this type of power creep, and that is within the kit. Units doing more things, attacks doing more things, attacks getting more powerful, attacks having more statuses, that kind of thing. Just as we go on, one of the more nebulous, because it's mainly strategic, like we see the characters do more and we see that that does better, that's obvious, right? But it's not so blunt as a level or stat increase is. And this happens gradually throughout the year in cycles. Usually there's maybe a step up around the 0.5 anniversary time. So every 6 months, there's kind of a new strategic level of power that's released. And this is stronger than what's currently out, but not in a way that is so strong as to invalidate things. This is a much more subtle power creep. But it's also one that's a little less answered by the game. Jobs do occasionally get their skills updated. It's happened a couple of times, and it's taken jobs that were basically irrelevant and at least made a couple things in there interesting in certain contexts. You know, like I'm actually sometimes happy to see Lancer as a sub-job, even though I know it's going to be basically terrible, because Dragon's Kin has been upgraded to just do like 5 things, and that usually works pretty well in a buff rotation. Now, usually, when there's a significant power creep in the game, it's very easy to say, well, it'll be fine. All of the older units will be upgraded, and it may not make them as good as the new stuff, but it will make them able to compete and do things. They may not win, but they will at least be able to show up and do things. But for one, because of costs increasing, which is kind of a third type of power creep in the game, 100 cost characters have become more standard, 80 cost characters are basically unusable in any and all contexts. They're somehow even worse and limited. So 80 cost characters in general need an upgrade. This is a big problem. Also, lower rarity characters, they haven't been releasing them for a long time, for the most part, especially in gacha. Because can you imagine if you got the banner pull, but it was for like an SR or MR unit? You would be so mad. Even though it might potentially be a cool unit, like it just doesn't feel good to pull them on banners. The only banner I know of that even really has these is like the Final Fantasy Tactics collaboration. But more pressingly, and this is the one that breaks the pattern in a way that makes me feel anxious, I guess. Because there doesn't seem to be a clear plan or even a semblance of a plan in place to fix this. But ever since Ashen Mont, all of the characters in the game that have been released have a noticeably higher stat threshold. This is like giving them a level increase that's exclusive to these new characters. But unlike when they do that, because that has happened twice, both going from level 99 to 120 and level 120 to 140. Sure, it got rolled out for the newest characters first, but they updated people over time, and they started doing those updates the second the system rolled out. Like if this were a normal scenario, Prince Mont would have got a stat boost when Ashen Mont came out, which makes a lot of thematic sense anyways. But there doesn't seem to be any system in place to give these stats back to characters that need them. So I have a few proposals, a few ways that we can fix power creep in the game overall. For one, we've got to make older characters more powerful so that they can be relevant. And we could either do this quantitatively, just by boosting their stats, resistances, those sorts of things, or we can do it qualitatively. Now, I intend to do both, but let's talk about qualitative, because that one's a little bit different. We want them to functionally perform better. And one way of doing that is making them easier to reincarnate. So maybe for 80 cost characters, they cost less UR scrolls to upgrade, maybe half as many. And it might even be helpful to give a few reincarnations to those characters on the developer side for people who have poured reincarnations into, say, like the original Kitone. Those people are dedicated and they deserve a reward. For 70 cost characters, we should not only do that, but maybe reduce the cost of leveling them up in terms of shards as well. And then, for anything MR rarity or lower, we should do a couple of things. First, we should double the amount of stat upgrades they get per reincarnation. They're still going to be weak characters, but we will give them the ability, through the reincarnation system, to level up even faster. Also, maybe reducing, for these characters especially, the prisms, fragments, and EXP cubes required to level them up. Because these are still, I think, pretty close, if not exactly the same as they are for UR units. And this means that building any level of MR or lower units really wipes your resources quickly, even though it should be a painless process. So let's make that process more painless. Also, like with the last upgrade, we're going to double everyone's reincarnations. If you have 10 reincarnations on a character, let's move that up to 20. Just bonus reincarnations for everyone. If that gets you up to the max level or beyond, maybe no refunds necessarily, you got a benefit, but now we're giving you even more. So that's going to be helpful. And I think that would take those characters a long ways towards relevance. For older 100 cost and 90 cost units, what I would propose is giving them just an across-the-board stat boost that's activated by their Master Ability 2. So if you haven't activated their Master Ability 2, this would be part of that. If you've already activated it, then you would just get it. And this should boost their stats by maybe half of the margin that the new characters boosted. Again, give them part of the upgrade, but still keep the newest things good. Maybe also throw in something a little extra, something a little like 5 AoE resistance or something, maybe determined on a character-to-character basis. And then, for 80 cost, and I'm not really going to get into it, but we could do something for lower cost units like this as well. As an addition to their Master Ability 1, so this is probably going to be active for everybody, it's just going to be immediate boost for all of these older characters. I'm thinking about doing maybe 4 things for each of them. We could take 2 elements for each. So like, let's say we have an earth character. You could do wind resistance and lightning resistance for that character of 5. And this applies to anyone in the party. So if you're putting Mont up front on a team that's meant to bait wind, Mont himself, Imar Mont, would be able to give the rest of the team a little bit of wind resistance. Or, if he's on an earth team, he'd be able to give the team a little bit of lightning resistance. I mean, he'd be giving both resistances to everybody anyways. But it would, by using two elements like that and set up like that, you would be able to use characters into bait setups, and you would be able to use them to reinforce their own element against what it's good in. Okay, so that's two of the things. Then we could pick just a general resistance type to boost for them. And when I say general, I mean like 10% magic damage reduction, 10% physical damage reduction, 10 AoE resistance, or 10 single target resistance. Any of those could work. Most newer characters come with this. This kind of wasn't a thing back in the day. So I think adding just a little bit of this to each character would help. Could also be used to further differentiate them. You know, there didn't used to be single target resistance or AoE resistance characters. This would help older characters build into those dynamics. But again, not really at the same rate as newer characters, but helping them to catch up. Finally, increases to their HP and agility. Maybe 10% and 5% each. Those 5 things, they don't really do a lot. Each of those are small adjustments. But if you give those 5 things to all the older characters in the game, now you actually have incentives to build with some of these older characters and try to do different things with them. And especially with the elemental resistances that we're talking about here, these would be stacking benefits. So if you used a team of all older Earth units, then they would be giving each other 15% lightning and wind resistance, building both into their strength, but also fortifying them against their weakness. And this would just be something that newer characters, Ashenmont and Jume into the future, wouldn't be getting as a part of their ability upgrades. You could maybe go even further than this with lower rarity characters. When we upgraded, I think maybe it was the MA2 upgrade, or maybe it was 140. But every MR character, I think, got a status resistance that they got a little bit of resistance to, that they could give to their whole party, or at least anyone who shared an element with them. I think maybe even for those lower tier characters who need even more help to keep up, I think for those characters, they could probably use this on top of the things that I just mentioned. Make them easier to reincarnate, make them able to build relevant elemental resistances for the teams you might use them on, give them a little bit of resistance, a little bit of HP, a little bit of agility for themselves, and give them the ability to build into different strategies, nullifying and reducing the effectiveness of different statuses. This gives you a lot of dials to play with, a lot of ways to make each character unique through these upgrades, but also just a general boost that's going to push all of them, maybe not to the point where they're good in an overpowering way, but they add more to the team. They finally bring something to the team. Even if they don't do much, they're still boosting the power of the team. So you could have weaker characters that function as power boosters for the rest of the team. The power is not in themselves, the power is in what they can give to others. And I think for older, more experienced characters, this makes sense. We could even call this, say, a veteran bonus. For all characters before a certain point who need upgrades to compare to the basic upgrades that have been given to stats, we could give veteran bonuses who, instead of building themselves up to be stronger, build their allies up to be stronger. And this could create teams where you have one new unit who has big stats, and then you have 2 older units that have synergy with them that help you build them up. Also, another thing that could be cool, I think this would just be good somewhere in the game at some point, and this would be a really good time to introduce it. But especially for characters who are MR and lower, maybe this is a way of doing a similar thing without the status resistances, or maybe even in addition to that. You could give them the ability to boost, let's say, HP and agility for other characters on their team that share a weapon type with them. That could be really cool. That would be another way to build teams, and another way, something that kind of competes with the elemental synergy bonuses. Because we've never seen a system like this for job VCs, or for job-based teams, and units. And we have the VC system. This would help bring it a little bit stronger. And it would be getting that strength through older units, which I think would be interesting. And I also think that this is kind of an interesting enough choice that you could even afford to go pretty strong with this, especially if it's something that is SR and lower, because they need a lot to help them be relevant. So, who cares if, say, Sergius, weak as he is, builds up the power of your other Lance characters like Veritas the Heavens and Ramada the Astro Lancer, just for being on your team. I mean, you could give a pretty significant boost as a trade-off for having such a weak character on your team. And furthermore, this could make cost-limited stuff way more interesting and dynamic, because those characters would be coming in with a lot more interesting stuff than just being a discount version of other characters. They would have a different sort of function on your team. They would be almost like a way to add an additional vision card worth of effects to your team. And I think that could be pretty cool. But hey, it's not just all about what I think. I'm not the entire WotV community. You are. So tell me what you think would be cool in the comments. I'd like to see all of your ways to try to bring these units closer to parity, which I think is the goal. Like, they aren't supposed to be as good as new units, but they should be good enough to use with new units and be able to beat newer teams. Remember that the free-to-play option for YouTube is to like and subscribe. And on your way down there to leave a comment, click the link in the description to get access to the rest of the Jackie Fox Media universe, including another YouTube channel where I talk about just life stuff, a podcast, if you want to hear that instead of see that. Also, I write books, and there are ways to support the channel via Patreon and Coffee. I even have a book for sale right now. It Even Happens While You Sleep, one of my newer works that I really think is cool, leads into a cool trilogy that I'm still finishing up writing right now. The hardback for that, beautiful art on the cover of this, by the way. $15 for a hardback, great deal. Honestly, I'm barely making any money off of it, but I want to get these books out there. I want to hear what you think about them, and honestly, just want to drum up a little bit of hype. So if you get hype about one of these books, pick up one, check it out. I'll be forever grateful. And with all that being said, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.